I personally don't think that you need to describe characters right away, but I've gotten into fights about that before with like some of my beta readers, where it's just like, you need to describe your characters, and it's like, I don't want to.
I've been thinking about good times, so tell me all your worst lies. I believe them if I try.
So today I have Kelly with me. Kelly and I are doing kind of like a critique together, and we did one on her channel, and then this is the second one that we're doing together. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys know who Kelly is. We just kind of like left comments on this piece that was submitted, and we're gonna talk through them. Typical critique style. Okay, so yeah, this is a dark academia thriller crime whip titled Summer's Devils. I guess we'll just like talk about a general overview of what we thought happened in the excerpt. So yeah, it seems like this is chapter 1. It starts out with a cold open of a murder, but we don't know who has been murdered. We don't know who did the murdering. Jumps 1 year earlier, and we meet a character named Roy, who is looking for a roommate, and he's like a college student, I guess. Yeah, and we get like an introduction to him and his 2 friends, and that's pretty much it, actually.
And I think he also has manic depression, and there's something going on with his dad that we don't know.
Yeah, lots of mysteries that are set up. Okay, so I guess we'll just dive into it. Yeah. I mean, we just annotated it. We're going to talk through the comments that we left. So yeah, it starts out with the description of a dead body and what we assume to be 2 boys who have maybe killed the dead body. It's unclear. Yeah, they're standing over the dead body.
I liked the opening. I think it was a good introduction, although I do think I like the second scene more.
Like when we, after the time jump, right?
Yeah, I think we get a lot of like characterization and a lot of like fun dialogue. I think the beginning really draws you in, but I would like to see like what's really unique about this kind of like cold opening.
So the first thing that I wrote down was, I just said, as a whole, consider pushing the opening paragraph further. So what I mean by that is all of this description is a very surface level. Actually, I would say this is true for the entire scene. It's all very surface level. It's very visual. There's a lot of time that's spent explaining how much the body is bleeding and how he can't believe he's staring at this dead body, and he's staring at it in fascination and horror. Dig deeper with that and try to find ways to convey why it's fascinating and horrific. One thing that I wrote is like, I think that you can consider using some figurative language, because that can really steep the reader in more deeply into why this is such a horrific sight. Like, beyond just the blood, the easiest thing is always like 5 senses, just to make the language jump out a lot more. There's a lot of license to just be, just to really make things like a lot more impactful, I guess.
Yeah, and I think something I noted down upon like a second reread is that I think each character speaks like very uniquely when we read the second scene. And I kind of wish we could see that a little bit more in this first opening, and how it ties into the reader, and how reading this specifically is unique to the story and not maybe just another opening with like a murder happening.
I agree. I think I wrote at some point here that there is room to inject a little bit more character into the scene without naming any of the characters. Yeah. One thing here, I said less is more, I think. And then I kind of was explaining that I don't think you need to name these emotions, the fear and the guilt. I think you can cut it. I honestly think you can cut it. I think a lot of this is implied.
Actually, I want to make a note here that I kind of wish there was more like setting almost, because I have like not really sure where we are.
Yeah,
actually very not sure where we are. Could this be like in the middle of the woods or in an alley? And I liked the breakfast part. I feel like we could do something with that. Like, are they at the back of like a brunch place, or how, like, I'm interested, like, going, like, while I'm reading this, I'll kind of be like piecing it together, like the timeline, like what's going on, where are we. So I think I like to see a little bit more setting.
You know, I think maybe if there's like an element to the writing where the writer doesn't want us to have too many details, because obviously the story is leading up to this murder, I think that's fine. But even indicating like time of day, even if you're not explaining that they're in the woods, like is the body like laying in dirt, or is it on concrete, or is it on grass? A little bit more setting description helps with the atmosphere. The
who was clutching his abdomen with fingers wet with blood, I thought that like stood out to me, because I didn't think his partner would, I don't know, is he shot? I think this is to create suspense, so this is kind of a rhetorical question. I was just thinking to myself.
Oh, yeah. This is an interesting detail, that the person that he's with has also been injured.
Yeah.
That's a great detail. So the last thing that I wanted to say on the topic of character is, okay, so here's my long comment. Oh, you also had a comment there too. My long comment is that this is familiar phrasing, but I think you can get away with it if you really want to, just because that line is inherently very intriguing. The one thing I wanted to add is that this piece of dialogue is very pivotal. It's the punchline of the scene. So depending on how you frame the dialogue, you can also kind of squeeze more character out of it. I don't know who these characters are, but if you want to kind of consider alternatives to your punchline, essentially, we need to get rid of the body. One example I wrote here was like, what if he looks over at his partner and he says, "What are you waiting for? Start digging." So I don't know if that's in line with the character, but what it does is it offers a little bit more insight into like the personality of one of the characters, maybe the dynamic between the two characters. The reason that I kind of picked this kind of dialogue was that the narration here says that his accomplice is stone-faced and far too steady. So I think you can convey this emotion of the accomplice being very stoic about this entire thing in the way that he speaks.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, and I think this is Roy, because like the first chapter says Vincent, so I'm assuming the main character is Vincent and his friend is Roy, but I could be wrong. But if it is Roy, I think he has a very unique way of speaking, so I agree that we could play with that.
Definitely play with the dialogue and insert a little bit more insight into how the characters are kind of interacting without giving anything away. My overall thoughts on the scene is that like the idea and the premise of it is good. I would just dig deeper with the language, because I think the second part, like the second scene, and then the scene in the coffee shop with the friends is really strong.
Yeah, I like the visual here of like the smoking and pacing to like talk about this part of the piece. I feel like a lot of it, you don't have to say all of it too much, and I understand. I think the author is trying to convey like this mundaneness and like how hard it is to fall asleep, but I think it can come off a little bit like too tangenty.
I agree. I think there definitely is a balance, because on one hand I understand that the character is supposed to have these sort of like restless episodes, so I think you can get away with some of that restlessness in their narration, but I would still cut out some of the redundancies, because for example, something like this, like he's pacing his apartment, he's smoking, and you know, he's calling potential roommate after potential roommate, searching desperately for someone to move in with. You don't need to say it, right? It's already implied. Even here as well, like you can keep the sentence. I would just like simplify.
I was even thinking we could maybe even remove this sentence. Because in the next line he falls asleep, and I think something I notice, maybe I do this too, is that we don't have to describe everything that's happening. I think when you're describing something, everything should be like intentional with the purpose, and I think in this case your readers are aware of what's happening, so maybe you don't have to, say he searched on his search and then he collapsed.
I agree. I think I even said here like I'd cut the detail. because it's also like a flow thing, because it says that, okay, he collapsed on the bed, and then he managed to sleep again, and he shot awake again, and then it's like, at first he tried to busy himself again, but then he blah blah blah. I think the feeling of his restlessness has already been conveyed, so I think there is space to remove some of the phrases. I had a comment here that was basically just on specificity. It provides some context on why he needs to find a new roommate really soon. And then it says he couldn't afford to make ends meet on his own anymore, not with the hospital bills piling up. And honestly, this is like a super minor thing. Like, this is an opportunity to kind of explain more about his situation. Instead of saying he can't afford to make ends meet, you could rephrase it to his night shifts at the gas station couldn't afford this place, or whatever. At the time, I didn't know that he worked at a coffee shop yet, because I hadn't gotten to that part, but you can swap it with that.
Yeah, I can see both perspectives, but I usually do agree that the more like specific or more detailed earlier on can help like contextualize.
Yeah, it's more of a way. The only reason I suggest it is because it's a way to get around familiar phrasing. But again, I don't want to sound like I'm on a crusade against familiar phrasing. No. Like, I use my fair share of it as well.
Actually, just really quick, in the comments I wrote like "Rip America." It was just okay. I'm American.
So you can say it.
Yeah, so I can say it. But yeah, it was just, I forget that like you have to pay for your hospital bills. So yeah. And also like on the contextual part, I also wonder if this is like related to his dad, because we go into a bit about his dad later. Yeah, I think it was just this line. When he drew his hand away, he stared at the ceiling, his vision blurring. I think we can just go to the next line. I think he's flipping over his face.
I agree. I think in general, this entire sequence, there's a lot of meandering, which again is fine because it's kind of the point of being in his head. But I think every single description should be doing something different, I guess. Moving the plot along in a different way. Again, salt to taste. I guess you can pick which descriptions are really the most important. 'Cause, I mean, I kind of liked this line. I don't know. It was like, there was kind of like some figurative language that I was like,
if we remove that previous line, I think this line could like really stand out.
He's going about his routine.
For some reason, I think like you can kind of combine this line and the previous line, because this is a lot of thoughts about coffee. Yeah, and I get it, because like we're in his head, and he's like, you know, going through a lot. But I wonder like if we can condense it to also like illustrate that point, because I like how you're saying that, oh, he likes a lot of sugar, he knows how to make lattes.
I definitely think there's a way to say this exact thing in less words. You just kind of cut some weasel words out. I guess it depends. I almost feel like my impression is that Roy certainly meanders, his own thoughts kind of meander. It might just be his character voice. So that's definitely up to the writer. Because I could personally live without it, but also it's an interesting thought for him to have. I have no definitive answer on that.
Actually, but maybe it's just about like refining the words. So
I agree. I think it's just a polish thing. He spent most of breakfast meeting his too bitter coffee in a granola bar, staring blankly at a wall and dreading seeing Ajax and Florence at work. I actually kind of like this line, because relatable.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, I just liked it. Oh right, you had a comment about the following paragraph.
I actually thought I would have liked to see this more, just to kind of break up a lot of what's been told to us. I don't know, we do get to see a little bit later, but I think this is just a thought I had.
Yeah, I almost feel like upon a second reread, I would almost like to just cut the paragraph off. Because we're gonna see Ajax and Florence in the very next scene, and we're gonna literally see them do this already, and we're gonna already unpack, you know, their worrying over him and sort of the interrogations and all that kind of stuff. So I would consider cutting, just because I think it's going to be explored already later in the scene. Halfway through his breakfast sulking session, he decided in a spark of genius that reading the newspaper would be better than just staring at the wall.
I think you could just maybe remove it too.
My impression was that this honestly just kind of matches Roy's character voice. I think it's one of those like snarky kind of self-deprecating character voices that have been established, that's been established so far. So I personally think the writer could probably get away with saying something like breakfast sulking session, and I think the way that I read it, at least, was that there was a note of sarcasm in his voice when he says, you know, in a spark of genius, he wasn't just gonna stare at the wall all day. So I personally didn't have an issue with it, if only because I feel like throughout the scene the writer has earned the character voice. I think maybe if like some of the redundancies in the monologue earlier, if some of those were just cut out, then we would maybe get to this, like we would just move faster.
Yeah, I think so. Because I like how he has a lot of like introspection, like with that line. Right. I'm pretty sure I've sulked and like was like, oh, I'm sulking. So
right. He grabs the newspaper. Yeah, I also think this was a long sequence.
But yeah, at the same time, like maybe this is just him.
Maybe that's just what he's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know. I still think you could cut these details out now that I'm looking at it. Like I almost feel like what if you just said, if you just cut this out and you just started on the paper was nothing out of the ordinary until he saw it. Yeah.
Or like maybe instead of through the articles, you could just be like few job wanted advertisements. And
I don't know. I'm so conflicted because there's this spectrum of like you should only give details if they're necessary, but then some details are also atmosphere, and I think that's a spectrum. I guess only the writer can decide which ones are truly necessary.
Yeah, I thought this was kind of funny.
Believing in God for a split second despite his agnosticism. Yeah, I think there's a strong character voice there for Roy's character.
Yeah.
Took him only a split second to remember his streak of bad luck, but before he could deter himself from calling entirely, he dropped the paper, finished off his granola bar, and hopped to the phone. Right, you had a comment here about Roy's age.
I always have comments about people's age, I guess.
Right, you want like the visualization.
Yeah, kind of. Also like characterization too. Just because like I think if we... Well, he said he was working. So when I first read this, I thought he was like a student, but I'm still not too sure what he is or what role he's supposed to play in like the society. And I find that character details like that like just help me ground like who this person is.
I mean, I thought he was just like college age. Am I wrong?
Yeah, because like he's finding a roommate. So
yeah,
is he like... And then he has like his dad stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, okay, personally, I guess I don't know. I don't really get hung up on age, but I think it's like if there's an opportunity to hint at the character's age, it's always good to do as early as possible. Yeah, I'm honestly like in my own writing, I'm really bad at like saying how old characters are. Like I don't even. In my books, like you won't know until like the middle of the book, which is not necessarily good writing advice. But
sorry, can we scroll up really quick? I was thinking about the sulking session again. I feel like this whole thing is like kind of like a stream of consciousness, like this introspection. Like I like it, but I feel like it breaks the stream of consciousness a bit.
It's definitely a transition sentence. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not really hung up about this, but.
It's just something
I just
to
thought I would make that more clear because I agree with what you said. Like I think it does fit his voice, but something that it just stood out to me. I was like, well, he knows what he's doing, and it seems to like break what the mundane task that he's just doing so subconsciously almost.
Yeah, I mean the transitions are always hard to approach because how do you go from I guess having a character change course I guess in a scene? Yeah, I feel like these types of things are like it's so subjective. Yeah. Because I've been called out for my transitions in my own writing, so it's definitely like a tough thing. Okay, so I just wanted to make a comment about character description because I personally think it's a bit stilted for a character to describe themselves unless they're looking in a mirror, because it says here that he ran his hand through his dark hair. I think the still damp is fine, But I just thought the dark hair was a bit odd, or saying that he twirled the telephone cord around his pale white finger. I would just cut it out. I think there are other opportunities where you can convey what the character looks like in a more natural way. Because I don't think a character is going to like necessarily describe themselves in their own narration. I don't know, that's just my thought though, because that was just my reading of it.
Thought it didn't stand out to me too much, but unless you like it's like it should be intentional, right?
But there are other places to do it. Like I personally don't think that you need to describe characters right away, but I've gotten into fights about that before with like some of my beta readers, where it's just like, you need to describe your characters, and it's like, I don't want to.
Yeah, maybe it's like my age thing, like hell. Yeah, actually I inserted a paragraph, like the hello was actually in the same line as the clicked.
Oh, okay. That's a good point.
For a moment, see, I don't really know either. Okay, for a moment I thought the boy was Roy, but it was the boy on the other side of the line. So I thought we should indent that to signal that
this is true. Yeah. It's a new, actually the dialogue should definitely be on a new paragraph. My gut tells me that if the person who is speaking is like Roy, for example, then you can keep the dialogue in this paragraph. But because it's the other guy speaking, it should be a new paragraph. That's just my gut. I don't know anything about copy editing or whatever it's called, formatting. Or
maybe I formatted it wrong when I was putting this together.
Who knows?
Could be me too.
Could be our fault.
I made a note about the M dash. I'm very aware of my writing recently and like all the like line details, so we don't really need to go into detail for this, but I noticed this is like the 10th time this piece has used M dashes, maybe even more. And I think maybe switch up the sentence structure a little bit. I just noticed it a lot while I was reading
this. It's a good point. It's always, I think, good to be aware of your M dashes, because if you're like an M dash abuser like me, I'm also very aware of my M dashes. And what I will say is that my brain just thinks in M dashes, so I usually let myself get away with it in a first draft, but I do think I'm very aware of them when I'm revising, because I too use a lot of them.
Like them and semicolons and colons.
Me too. All of those. I love them all.
Okay, so I felt like his enthusiasm seemed a little bit out of character. Did I spell skeptical wrong in the comments? It just because like I remember that line, like it only took him a split second to remember his streak of bad luck, and it seemed like he was up all night, like he's maybe not in a good mood, he's drinking, he can't sleep. I thought this enthusiasm to me stood out, but or like I can also see it as like he's so excited, like, well, he's finally gonna get a roommate soon.
Right. Okay, that was my interpretation, the latter. I do think, to be honest, it was a pleasant surprise to see that Roy had a very like enthusiastic, because this is the first time he's speaking, right? He says, "Hi, Vincent," right? I actually kind of, it threw me for a loop as well, but I kind of liked it because I think it broke the stereotype in my head that this character who is, you know, in a manic episode or whatever is just kind of like a, why am I forgetting my words? A cold person. Standoffish or rude and stuff like that. Because I think it kind of creates this feeling that, like, you know, he's just like a normal young guy. And maybe he actually is kind of outgoing. I kind of liked it. I did read it as excitement because he's been searching for so long.
In my comments I said I liked it too. It was just like, whoa. Yeah,
so actually one thing I did like about this exchange between Roy and Vincent was that I felt like I got the impression that like Roy is kind of like the enthusiastic, sort of polite one, and then Vincent, his kind of dialogue stood out to me as a little bit more like, not irritated, but less polite.
It's like the grumpy sunshine.
Exactly. I was getting the beginnings of a grumpy X-Bomb sunshine, which I like. Yeah, I even pointed out here that I liked this characterization of Vincent. Like, we're just meeting him in the first, 2 seconds, and we already have this, like, kind of picture of what he might be like.
So we find out later that Vincent is Ajax's ex, right? Yes. So I'm wondering if I don't know, like that took me like by surprise because I thought these guys were like they were random.
Right.
Knowing that, I feel like would they behave a little bit different?
Like my impression was that Roy at this point doesn't know that this is the same Vincent. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure. Well, I'm gonna have to double check that. But yeah, I think they talk about that in the next scene. But I do think that this is a great way to do physical description where we're getting some idea of what Roy looks like. This is a much more natural way to convey that physical description. It was naive to be this excited and flooding with nerves before he knew anything, but it was hard to deny himself this happiness when he'd spent so long looking for a roommate and being stressed over bills. Okay, I just said this is redundant.
I can see, I think, why the author wanted to keep that, just to like remind us that
he's so relieved.
Yeah. But also like maybe he's, because we're always like in his mind, he's just thinking of this, so I can see what the author is trying to say, like just to convey that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I would play around with the phrasing.
I see your point.
We've used like similar phrasing already earlier in the paragraph, so I think if you want to keep the line about him being relieved, it's fine. I would just find different words for it. So the next scene, Roy goes to work and we find out that he works at a coffee shop that's like near this campus or on the campus. No, near the campus.
Yeah, I like this first line, but I do agree with you in the second that like how do we get to what the meat of what the sentence is trying to say.
Yeah.
So I offered a line suggestion that kind of combines both of them if the author does want to keep it in.
Right. Just like shortening it, basically.
Yeah. Here I'm wondering, like, are they students? Because it says, like, it's ideal for bouncing between work and class. Meant that Roy and his friends never found a reason to work elsewhere.
I assumed they were students. But although, I mean, I guess with the line, they were bouncing between work and classes, I guess it's pretty obvious that they're students. I think I have a comment here somewhere about how I felt like the entire sequence, it really did feel like being on a college campus and talking to your college friends.
So
like this conversation that the three of them have is like one that I could imagine having when I was in university. I think this is a great line, which essentially serves as an introduction to the character's dynamic, right? Though it helps that Roy was a great flirt, Florence was ethereal and gorgeous, and Ajax was brilliantly charismatic. I think this line is great. One thing I just said was like specificity. It's like it's very minor, but if you just like take the description a little bit farther, I think what I said here is it doesn't have to be these words, but something like, why is Florence ethereal and gorgeous, and why is Ajax brilliantly charismatic? You could just like add in a detail, like Florence looked like a Bond girl and Ajax had enough charisma to befriend a rabid dog. Only because I feel like the character voice would suit that kind of like playful tone.
I guess something I'm thinking, how do you feel about like a character describing their friends with like physical descriptions? Do you think, like, in your opinion, do you think that's something you would do naturally? Like, let's say the author wanted to insert physical descriptions here.
Personally, I think I see it in like a lot of writing. It all depends on how you do it.
Yeah.
I think it always has to be in context. You can't just stop everything to like describe a character. And I think the writer kind of does do it well here, where the narration flows very naturally into the description of his friends, and it's only one sentence, and then the plot moves along. I also like this line. The three of them taking paid 30s at the same time to gossip over snacks and coffee.
I wrote the window.
Oh yes,
I'm all about, I'm realizing now, like I'm a big like setting person. And I thought like we were inside a coffee shop, right? But looking at this, I feel like we're outside.
We are outside, and it wasn't clear that they had moved outside until later, I don't think.
I would love to see maybe kind of like when we are. Is it, well, what's the weather like in Seattle?
This is
just true. Little details like that. I like to be smelling the rain. When I'm sitting
I agree. Outside. I love smelling rain. A couple sentences to make it clear that they're actually, I think they're sitting outside. I would assume that they would be gossiping inside. So I liked this description. Florence
Yeah,
grinned
I
as she
do.
fumbled her red bangs into chunky, colorful hair clips. I was like, I love this detail. And same thing with Ajax's character description. I just like wrote something to simplify it. She was staring at him expectantly while Ajax was uncharacteristically drained at her side, potentially hungover, potentially depressed. It was a solid bet either way. This is like pretty fine on its own. I just think the double passive voice with the double what are these called? Adverbs?
Adverbs.
Yeah. I think it reads a bit just very, very slightly stilted. I think you can get away with it, but I just wanted to point it out.
I like the combination of both.
White teeth gleaming like wolf's fangs. Yeah, that's a nice detail. Don't mess with Florence. Roy looked at her deadpanned, tired of that same question every day, amongst the other nagging questions he was anticipating.
I said I think we could remove this.
Yeah.
Because I think we mentioned this earlier too in his getting ready of the day. And I think
His get ready
implies, with me. Yeah, get ready with me. And I think it implies too. I thought it was funny though how like she asked that question. I thought this whole I actually think this dialogue was really nice.
I think I had a comment about how the banter was very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it says Roy shook his head and the couple fell into silence. Yeah, I wouldn't use the phrase the couple, even if they were a couple, which I don't think they are. I don't think. Yeah, I think we just say the two of them, or even just they. Roy shook his head and they fell silent. They fell silent, not fell into silence. This is like an extra. It sounds stilted. This is kind of a funny little interaction where it seems like they made a bet on Roy's love life. Roy pretended he hadn't seen them betting on his love life and looked out into the street. I actually chuckled out loud when I read that. So I left a comment because it's true. Nice. I had a little hee hee ha ha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this also like shows, in a very subtle way, how well his friends actually know him.
Yeah.
Because they're like anticipating, like, did you eat anything? Coffee doesn't count, Yeah, a silence fell over the trio. Roy's posture tightened with tenseness. I don't know if this is a typo, but I just pointed it out. Because I think it sounds a bit redundant to say you tightened with tenseness. Because if you tighten, you're tense.
Yeah.
So I think it's an either or thing.
Maybe just keep one. I think it's good tension that's being built. The I want to see more part is not necessarily like right now, but I'm anticipating like the dad's gonna show up, and
right.
I would kind of like to see that.
This is something that I already mentioned like in our previous video, but instead of dialogue tags, you can just use action indicators. Just saying Ajax frowned instead of Ajax eventually said frowning. Right. Then he says that he found a roommate. And then I think it's funny, like, how hyped his friends get.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice detail as well. Yeah, this is, like, great dialogue. And then he says it was Vincent. And then his friends get, like, really...
So, like, in this moment, it seems like Roy knew it was the Vincent.
Right,
as opposed to finding out.
He shrugs. Then he says he hadn't thought about Ajax's ex-boyfriend in a long while, not till now. They never met, considering Roy's personal life was such a mess in high school, making Vincent's position in his life fairly inconsequential. He knew from Florence's rundown of the situation the relationship hadn't ended well. Everyone involved pointedly took Ajax's side. Vincent hadn't taken the breakup well either. What needs to be clear here, because I'm assuming that the writer's intention was that like Vincent was like so not on Roy's radar that they never met, and he doesn't actually like know him, know what he looks like, whatever. I think it should be clearer though that he doesn't know, because I think this is good information to dump at this time, but it needs to be clearer.
Yeah, I'm assuming they don't, but from what Florence is saying, I feel like if Roy was so far removed, he wouldn't even remember.
Right. I don't have that much to say about anything else. I did say here that I liked this opportunity that the writer took to mix physical description and characterization. It comes in like really naturally. I think it's funny when the first like exposition you get of a character is through the eyes of their ex. Like if you have that opportunity, take it, because it's fun.
I also like the colon used in here. I don't know. It's a nice sentence.
We love colons. Yeah.
This is not like a alert or anything. I was just curious why Roy doesn't room with his friends. Because it seems like he's really desperate. Like he really needs to, or something bad's gonna happen.
That's a good point. I think even if it's like one sentence, just like one random sentence about why he can't live with Ajax and Florence. I had a comment here about how I liked the atmosphere and that I thought the scene was really enjoyable. Yeah. Nice character moments. And, you know, apart from all the stuff we were saying about maybe just making it clear that they were outside and having more description about that, I think the vibes were good. Yeah, I agree. I thought it was endearing when Roy is like, it'll be fine. Yeah. To not fall in love with a pretty boy that you literally live with. I don't trust you at all, Roy. And I said, I don't trust him either. Yeah. I think that, to be honest, I think I wrote it in my comment here. I said the scene was really good, really great moments with banter, characterization, and I thought Roy's character voice was really fun to be in. Like he was a really fun character to follow. I said the balancing act between depicting his struggles with his mental health / trying to function as a normal human being and trying not to worry the people that care about him. I thought that was a nice balance in this short excerpt that we got. And I think having this follow the murder cold open is very strong. Yeah. So all in all, I thought it was like a strong premise. So the only feedback that I really have is making that opening scene on par with the other two scenes, because the following two scenes were much stronger in terms of their description and atmosphere. So I would try to inject that into the prologue, and then just watch out for weasel words and redundancies in the descriptions. Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said. I do think this is one of the strongest pieces I got from the submissions. I love like friend scenes on campus. Me too. More friendship scenes. Yeah, and I'm really glad to see that, and how they're so caring about him and supportive through like his mental health and his dad. Just some like minor things. We did start the first like cold opening from Vincent's perspective, just because his name is at the top, and I'm assuming it's Vincent, but then we skipped to Roy's perspective. So I don't know if this was intentional. I just wanted to note that. I almost feel like that opening scene should be a prologue. But yeah, I think it's a really great start. I'm really curious to see how we get to that murder. Me too. I hope Roy is not murdered. I hope Roy's not a murderer. Yeah, that makes me so sad. Yeah. I don't know which one would make me sadder. Yeah, I'm like curious to why, like how his partner got shot. Like that's interesting too. Yeah, I hope that our feedback was helpful or interesting to listen to. Again, it's like just our perspective on things. Yeah. So yeah, but very strong start. So if you ever publish this book, you better tell us, because I would love to know the ending. Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's always something to put your work out there. I agree. And like, especially, you know, giving a section of your first chapter or your entire first chapter to critique, trusting us with that. It was great. That's it for this video. Thank you to Kelly for joining me and for letting me critique it. Thanks for watching, guys. Yeah, bye. Bye. I know it's not always easy. Time slows, still trying to find the reason to hold on to those dreams of mine.